Dzień dobry moi drodzy, kochani jedyni, witam was na kolejnym webinarze Wial Poland. Jeszcze mówię do was po polsku, bo zaraz będzie dopiero po angielsku, jak dołączy do mnie Chuck, chociaż on mnie słyszy w ogóle i słyszy jak gadam po polsku, ale chciałem was przywitać na razie solo, po to, żeby po pierwsze was przywitać, po drugie powiedzieć, żebyście się koniecznie zalogowali na czacie, dlatego że jak się logujecie na czacie, to możecie zadawać Chuckowi pytania i mnie przy okazji. I w ogóle można pisać po polsku, nie trzeba pisać po angielsku, jakby co, to ja wszystko przetłumaczę. I w ogóle webinar będzie po angielsku za chwilę. Więc uprzedzam, żeby się ktoś nie zdziwił. Dla świeżynek, dla osób, które są pierwszy raz na naszym webinarze, uwaga, przedstawiam się, chociaż większość z was pewnie mnie zna. Mam na imię Tomek, nazywam się Tomasz Janiak, prowadzę Wial Poland, czyli Polski Oddział Światowego Instytutu Action Learning i poprowadzę dla was ten webinar. Oprócz tego, że możecie sobie zalogować do YouTube i w ogóle pisać na czacie, to po zalogowaniu się zachęcam, żeby subskrybować kanał, bo tam informacje też będą o kolejnych takich webinarach. I jak włączycie YouTube'a i pojawi się jakieś nowe nagranie o pracy z grupami, z zespołami czy o Action Learning, to tam na tym ekraniku też wam się pojawi właśnie to nagranie. Słuchajcie, mamy 45 minut już niecałe, żeby przegadać Action Learning i Design Thinking. Dla tych z was, którzy zostaną do końca, będzie też prezent, będzie w ogóle plik. Chuck przesłał mi wcześniej plik dla was, żebym tam wam też przesłał i w ogóle to przegadamy, więc to się pojawi na czacie, ten link później wkleję i będziemy o tym gadać. Patrzę, czy wy coś do mnie piszecie na... Szybko nadaję. No właśnie, nie wiem, jakiś chyba taki jestem podekscytowany, bo jest Chuck. No ale dobra, słuchajcie, jedziemy, będzie czołóweczka, jak zwykle, a potem będzie rozmowa. Ciach. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have a consultant, a facilitator, a trainer, a master action learning coach, a design thinking specialist with us here today. Chuck Appleby is joining us. Hi, Chuck. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing great. Good to be here.
Chuck, I'm calling in from central Poland. You're calling in from the East Coast in the United States. Somewhere around Washington, D.C. or Virginia, somewhere there. Where are you?
Yes, I live in Virginia, about 20 miles from Washington, D.C. And I'm in my office. And in my office, if you look over my right shoulder, you'll see a poster in the back that my wife gave me that she got when she was a child from a show, a Polish musical called Kram z Piosenkami. I hope I've gotten that
no,
close.
You got this really close. Kram z piosenkami. Yeah, I even looked. You told that to me before the webinar, and I actually looked it up. It sounds like it's a well recognized musical show. Very interesting. Yeah. So you already have some Polish connections.
I have Polish connection, and every month I meet with two women. One who lives in Poland, Ava Francis, who's also in the action learning world. So I do have a connection to Poland besides Tom, who's a great connection to have.
Thanks, Chuck. I'm flattered. Listen, I know you are, like the core of your professional activities are these two pillars. On the one hand, action learning. You've been with Wild for a long time. Actually, I think since the beginning of times.
Yes.
And then I know how passionate and professional you are about design thinking. With us on this webinar, we have people who are both familiar with action learning and design thinking, who are familiar with one of them, or who are not yet familiar with either of them. So let's try to quickly define them. If somebody asked you, "Hey, what's action learning? What's that action learning? What is that all about?" What would you say?
Yeah, I'd say it's a problem-solving method that was designed in the UK in the Cavendish Physics Lab, and its purpose was to help keep up with the rapidly changing universe. And the founder, Reg Revans, realized that the world was changing so fast and we weren't learning fast enough. And he thought the key to that was asking powerful questions with a group of diverse people for different perspectives to first clarify the problem and then to sort of go into solution. And that framing the problem is really, I think, the key aspect of action learning that jumps right out. Most problem solving we do tends to say, okay, here was the problem we were given, let's go and solve it. We never do that in action learning. We sit back for hours, an hour, sometimes multiple hours for a large corporate problem to make sure we have the real problem. What I discovered with action learning was, hey, it's a great method for problem solving. But when it comes to innovation, which is something that we're all trying to do, I'm sure, in almost any job we're in, that I needed some more sort of a boost of creativity. And that's when I got connected to design thinking. And what I discovered was the mindsets behind action learning and design thinking were very similar. That emphasis on questions, that emphasis on diverse people in your group to help solve it. The bias for action, that, you know, even though you don't have the final solution, take a step forward, reflect on it, and come back and put what you learn from that reflection into action. And it's a continuous cycle.
Right. So if you were to frame what design thinking is, how would you put it in one or two sentences?
Yeah. So design thinking is, again, a problem-solving method that has the human being at the center. So it basically says we're always solving process or strategy or customer experience problems. But what we want to make sure is that we're bringing the human being involved, or the human beings involved in the problem, and focus first on them. Understand their needs, not just their functional needs, but their deeper emotional needs. Like, I want to be famous might be a key to a breakthrough solution, if you heard that from somebody you were interviewing.
Right.
And it's also at the end, and in the middle, it's very similar to what we've all done. It's basic brainstorming, but at the end, it's prototyping, putting something messy, sometimes just a little mock-up or a drawing, and then iterating, getting feedback, improving, iterating. So it's a very iterative process. It's a very human-centered process, and it's a very question-based process, just like action learning.
Right. So before we move on to combining the two, I know you had been in consulting and developing people in problem-solving world for some time before you discovered action learning and then design thinking. I know you had been,
Yes.
before you went on your own, I know you had been the head of management consulting in a consulting firm. So
Right.
how do you think, like business, in terms of your work, your professional activity, how has these two processes impacted your life, your work?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to overstate it, but when I was trained in action learning, it was a life changer. Why was it a life changer? Because suddenly I was able to attract big companies. Microsoft was one of my first major clients because companies were starting to become aware of action learning. They wanted to use it to improve their ability to solve problems, but in many cases they were using it also to help develop leaders. So much of my action learning was in the context of a leadership development program. It's such a simple thing that people get it quickly, and it was just very powerful. And I kept having people come back and say, I want more of this. I want more of this. Design thinking came later, actually through my son, who went to the Stanford Design Thinking Institute, known as the D School. And I'd always been interested in creativity, but he really sparked my interest in design thinking, and I got trained in it. And I realized, again, a very powerful, simple to understand tool, but does some things that are very different than what we normally do. And that's first start with, who's the human in the middle of this? What are their needs? And then go to what's the technical solution that might help? And then finally go into what's the viable business model that we can build around this solution.
Right. And when you combine the two processes, in what kind of what kind of organizations do you work with? Is it only business, or is it also government organizations, or is it nonprofits? Who do you work with normally?
So I will tell you that I started using it in the U.S. Department of Energy and the Central Intelligence Agency, because I had mostly been doing government
CIA?
work.
Are you serious? So you worked with
The
CIA?
CIA, yes. And, I wasn't a spy. I was an OD, a consultant, and I was helping them solve. This wasn't a leadership program. It was, the first question they asked me was, how do we get more women and minorities in leadership positions at the top of the CIA?
Wow.
And the initial question from the director of intelligence was, how do I get more women and minorities into the gateway position, which is a gateway position was you have to be a special assistant to the director, or you have to be the president's daily briefer.
Right.
And so when we reframed the problem wasn't how do you get into these gateway positions, but how do you get into the positions, period? Because it turned out the gateway positions were 24/7 jobs, and many people in that position were in mid-career. They had young children. And so they were basically saying, if you're a mom or a dad that cares about your kids, forget about becoming a senior
Right.
leader, in essence.
Yeah.
So that was a powerful reframe. Most I would say the industries that I have helped the most have been in the financial services and healthcare, and specifically in pharmaceuticals. So those are the two industries within those, it was the IT part of those two businesses that I was usually involved with. Because as you all know, you've got some Scrum Masters out there. IT was just way behind in terms of keeping up with customer needs and satisfying them. And we had to develop a whole new mindset around how to do that. And design thinking played a huge role in reinforcing that notion for information technology.
So
Put the customer in the middle.
yeah.
And design thinking and iterate with them. Don't throw it over the wall, your solution after 6 months of development, but work with them continuously and get feedback, prototype, test.
Yeah, so I know you specialize in some projects that combine both methodologies, both action learning and design thinking. Can you say a few words how exactly you do it? In what circumstances and what such projects look like?
Yeah, so let me just tell you that the very first project I ever did was for Microsoft. It was in Nairobi, and Microsoft was had a leadership program. And what they did was take people around the world to environments that they were not familiar with, get them out of their comfort zone. And they were helping local nonprofits. And in one case, the team I was in was helping the UN Environmental Program develop an energy neutral building. And so we had a team of 5 people from Microsoft. We had an engineer from the UN Environmental Program. And we spent 3 days together framing her challenge and then developing a plan of action over the next over the next 6 months for Microsoft to engage from time to time to help her execute the solution. It was an amazing experience because Lova was her name, from Sweden, said, I have 8 projects. I have no money to build this building. And I have no consensus from all of the people who lived in the UN compound in Nairobi. And suddenly the people from Microsoft said, Lova, welcome to our world. This is our world too. And so she suddenly started to smile like, oh my gosh, you and Microsoft have the same challenge? And it shifted her mind like, maybe we can solve this. And we did. And at the end of the day, she was so happy. She sang a Swedish drinking song in Swedish. And basically she said, let me translate it for you. I love this and I want more. Most recently, I was in Copenhagen working with Salesforce and using design thinking and action learning. And it's a similar thing. They sent their people in the leadership program to Copenhagen to help local businesses and nonprofits that used Salesforce. Again, we spent about 3 days, just like in Microsoft, immersing ourselves in the problem. So in my case, it was an online grocery store that we were helping to reduce trying to help people reduce the amount of meat they eat for greenhouse gas production. And so we had to understand, what's the environment? We went to understand, what did the factory look like? What did, just basically an immersive experience to not just sit in a 4 walls of a room, but actually get out and interview people and talk to people and understand where they were coming from. And what we did was discover that the company had such a poor reputation in the world because of the way they treated their drivers, that their credibility in pushing sustainability would be way down the ladder, that they first had to solve that image problem. So again, what I'm saying is almost 80% of the time, the problem that comes in the door from the senior leader or from the project manager is almost never the problem we end up going to. And you know that, Tom, from your work in action learning. It's I get worried if we end up with the same problem after the framing session, and it's almost always.
Yeah.
So let me give you an example of an IT firm I work with, John Hancock. They were given a problem as follows: how can we create more effective and efficient applications for our financial advisors on the front line? So this is the IT people. They got lots of bad feedback, like you're not delivering on what you say, you're over time, blah, 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 blah. So we reframed it. And the final problem was not simply efficiency and effective applications. It was, how do we create a culture in which there can be more effective and efficient applications? So you see it shifted from what was largely a process sort of focused problem, efficiency and effectiveness, to a grander, broader. If we don't have a culture, for example, in which IT people routinely collaborate with their frontline financial advisors, then we're never going to get there. And so that was a huge breakthrough.
Yeah, I'm very interested in some details, but before I ask about the details, it was also a very interesting concept in those leadership development programs that you mentioned in Nairobi or in Copenhagen, meaning that usually, I think most businesses in Poland do that too. When they want their leaders to develop, they just get, collect them together in a room and they do some workshops for them. Maybe there is some action learning, but generally everything happens within the company. And here it's totally different. They go somewhere else in the environment, like you said, to help nonprofits who use the skills that these guys also have, right? That was the case in the Copenhagen. Yeah. Was that the solution that these companies came up with on their own, or was it your suggestion as an external consultant that you said, hey, why don't we do something like that?
Yeah, so we came up with a very different problem frame, and they then figured out, so how well we take this new reframed problem and working together solve it. And that in design thinking, that means going out and now talking to people. For example, at John Hancock, let's go talk to financial advisors on the front line. Let's really understand their point of view. Let's understand what they really need at a deeper level. And just an interesting 20-second story. The first time my group briefed the chief technology, the CIO of John Hancock, they said, their briefing was, oh, we've built you an app to help build a better culture. And the person they were briefing laughed. He said, you're kidding. You IT guys have built me an app to help change the culture between frontline financial advisors and IT. Well, in about an hour, the CIO was actually coming. Within 1 hour, they took that feedback. They actually morphed it into a skit they did showing their first approach. And then they showed their second approach, which was let's just sit down and listen. Instead of briefing chart, showing them what we've done. Let's just sit and listen. The CIO he was totally happy. Like, this, you've mastered it. This is what we need to change about our culture. We've got to be a culture of listening to the customer as opposed to throwing stuff at them and saying, good luck. We'll see you later.
Okay, so I'm understanding that concept of going beyond the company to some units to help them out, and that being a part of a leadership development program. That came out during the program. That was not the initial assumption. Is that correct?
Well, so the idea of going out and talking to people?
Going to, like you said, nonprofits and helping them and solving their problems with sales skills.
Yeah. Well, so what design thinking in particular does is tells you that you have to go out and talk to people. You have to immerse yourself. Whereas with action learning, I didn't find that, there was emphasis on doing discovery. We call it in consulting, right? Talking to people. But it was really a much deeper discovery where I'm really looking for what's underlying And let me give you a quick example. So the pharmaceutical I helped knew they were losing their billion-dollar cash cow. They knew, and they were selling drugs. In a year and a half, they were going to lose the cash cow. They said, we've got to change the way we market. We make it more customer-centric. Again, they brought me in because they knew design thinking might be able to help. So we interviewed a chief medical officer, one of the person who buys for a large health system. And she said, when they started asking, what's important to you? What makes you get up in the morning? She told them, what gets me up in the morning is my desire to be a thought leader in the industry at large. And suddenly they said, one of our biggest problems is getting people to answer the phone. What if we were able to get her questions that were on her mind to be a thought leader, and we pulsed the company from all over the company within 24 hours and got back to her? The idea would be she would put us on speed dial. Today, that company is building something that the team called a foresight engine, using AI, being able to quickly put a question out into the company and get data back from databases as well as interviews. And just, you can see how that one insight into a deeper need led to this bigger insight into how do we better connect with that human being. And of course, any human being would like to be smarter, right? So they realized it was widely applicable to everything. Am I being helpful? So tell me.
It's very inspiring. And still,
Okay.
I wanted to go down to some details of these projects. And if you could say a few words, how would you structure a project like that would combine action learning and design thinking? For example, would you just sort of combine both approaches simultaneously, or would you first use action learning to like frame the problem and then took it further
Yes.
using design thinking?
Yeah.
How do you do it, like, in terms of logistics and the whole organization and the structure?
So let me start out at the top level. To answer your question, I would say what I have learned is that 80% of the success of pretty much any engagement in consulting, but specifically in these immersive programs, 80% of the success happens before you even meet the people. What does that mean? You have a sponsor. You have a sponsor who really wants to solve that problem and will commit to actually using what the team does and not just treat it like a learning exercise and put it on the shelf. You have to have a team of people who want to be there. So I could go on, but there's more criteria. The sponsor has to be willing to have the problem change. You have to tell him up front, or her, this problem could actually change, just like it did with John Hancock to the culture piece. And so what I generally do is start with a program to make sure we have the right people, the right focus, the right amount of time, the right commitment. And then we use action learning. I get together with a small group of people from the company, including maybe one or two of the participants, and we frame the problem using action learning. And then once we frame the problem, we meet with the group and we give them the problem and we give them a chance to actually go out and start talking to people about the problem. And the interesting thing is, most people come, especially if they're very analytical, they want to ask them 29 questions. We've got an hour, they have 29 questions. And I always tell them, don't worry about getting the right questions. Ask this first question. What's been the most successful experience you've had in the frame of the problem? And what's the most unsuccessful? And with those two questions, they tell stories. And from those stories, people see their eyes lighting up or their face frowning, and they go, so why are you frowning? Why are you smiling? And from that, they get these deeper needs. I will say that once we get through the framing and then we go to the design thinking, even after you have a great solution, I always try to introduce from the very beginning the idea of we've got to begin with the end in mind, with this has to be something that we can implement, deploy within the context of the culture, the strategy, and the company operations. So we're always thinking about that. But then when I'm lucky, I get customers who say, Chuck, stay on and help us. Talk to us about change and how you make change happen. And so I'm an organizational development consultant, and this appeals to me. You can see I'm walking in many different lanes. If I wasn't this person, if I didn't have expertise in all these areas, what I would do is I would find somebody who was an expert in action learning. I would then find somebody in design thinking. I would find somebody in change leadership and create a team. I'm almost always working with a team of people. I don't pretend that I'm the world's expert in any particular thing, but getting the right people together on your team is critical.
Right. I wanted to ask you about some best practices in running such projects. And you actually mentioned a few already. To sum up, I heard
Yes.
that you really need a sponsor who is committed and really understands the whole methodology, both methodologies, and is ready for the problem to change and to be reframed. You need a small group, at least for action learning, with diverse competencies. You need to have some sort of end effect, end result in mind. What else would you say were some critical things that you need to take care of, some best practices that you always pay attention to?
Yeah. So one really just reinforces the notion of action learning. You've got to stop periodically and reflect. So in the middle of a meeting, I might, we stop, and you know this well, Tom, from action learning. We stop and say, how are we doing in asking questions, good questions, powerful questions to frame the problem? And then we get the people to say, well, I don't think we've really talked about this whole area. We haven't talked about the future. We've only talked about the present. And in addition, at the end of every session, we always make a commitment to action. And then we always do whatever we need to do in between. And then we reflect. We talk about, when we get together, what did we do and what did we learn from the action we took? So I see you shaking your head.
Yeah,
This
that's
is
very
pure,
classic
simple
of action learning.
Classic action learning. But you'd be surprised. I mean, the best practice is to be very strict about doing this reflection. Most people will say, Chuck, I don't want to reflect. I want to impress the boss. Let's keep designing. Let's keep, talk to more people. And I say, yes, absolutely. And right now we're going to take 5 minutes and we're going to talk about what's going well, what's not.
Yeah.
So that's, to me, that's huge, because this is so different. Framing the problem is so different than most problem solving. Reflecting on what we're learning and improving how we're working together as a team almost never happens in most companies. Now, I'm sure many of the people in the audience do this routinely because you're in the business. Those are probably two of the biggest best practices, but I think the one that I struggle with the most is the fact that I'm not going to be there forever, right? I'm not going to stay there while these people try to implement it. So I really try to find someone in the group who I call a champion, someone who, and this is not the sponsor. This is a worker bee or an action officer, project manager, who's really obviously gets it and wants to do it and is willing to pull the people together. And the final thing I'll say is that, remember the story about Microsoft. We didn't stop when we left Nairobi. Microsoft continued on for 6 months with volunteers. They reached out to the company and brought them in. So you really have to get that longer term commitment and really set that expectation up front. Like, guys, when this leadership program is over, we're still going to ask you to continue your development in helping the problem owner implement their solution.
Thanks so much, Chuck. That's very informative. What attracted my attention is that when you said that sometimes business people are reluctant to stop and reflect. I very recently talked to Ernie Turner, who you may know.
Yes. Yes. Very well.
Ernie, for those of you who don't know Ernie Turner, he developed or at least influenced the development of a variety of action learning called action reflection learning. And he said the same thing to me. Hey Tom, I had this CEO say to me, Ernie, the problem solving is great, but we don't need to reflect that much. We need, time is money. We don't need to spend so much time on reflection or learning. And Ernie said, Let me ask you a question. How is thinking important? How important is thinking in your company? And the guy said, well, it's very important. Thinking is critical. So let's just substitute reflection with thinking. So I try to, assume that approach sometimes and sort of sell this idea to business people that reflection can have very tangible business influence on, problem solving, those guys becoming better leaders and so on.
Yeah.
So you said a few words about some really critical things and like things you pay attention to. Is there anything that you try to avoid? Are there any pitfalls that they are waiting there, and if we don't pay attention, we're likely to fall in them? Any traps that you watch out for?
Two big, yeah, great question. Two big things come to mind. One is this notion of it has to be perfect. I'm going to go and talk to the leader and tell them what we've done, and it must be perfect. So I'm working with a pharmaceutical, Boehringer Ingelheim, which is based in Germany, and they came up with a great idea. And the concept was, we're being pushed aside by external consultants in the IT world. They're shadow IT everywhere, and people are no longer, they're not coming to us. So they came up with a great idea about how they were going to solve that. And they said, well, now we have to brief the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer, the Chief Strategy Officer, our boss in the IT marketing world, the IT section that helped marketing, and he was the sponsor. And they wanted to have this perfect briefing. And I had to say, you know what? If you do this briefing, you won't succeed, because you cannot give them the sense of the emotional component. People's minds are changed, not just by facts, but by emotions. They have to experience it. So what I said, do a skit. Show an interaction between a customer in your company and you, the IT person, and a bad experience that's sort of like today. And then show them with your new idea what the experience would look like. They fought me. No, we can't. But they finally, 4 people agreed. Oh, okay, we'll do it. They got a standing ovation at the end. The Chief Technology Officer from Austria said, I have never, ever experienced such a powerful briefing. When can I sign up to help you? And he was known as the company's biggest curmudgeon, biggest sort of negative guy. So get people to trust themselves, get people to trust that there's often a better way to communicate ideas than simply a perfect PowerPoint pitch. Yeah. So let me stop there.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Chuck. That's very informative. I think it may be a good idea to pull up that sheet you sent me. You sent me a table that sort of compiles different methodologies and stages, and that you may want to discuss. We still have about 10 minutes until we finish. Is that a good idea?
Sure.
Okay, so everybody, I'm gonna put a link in the chat box right now, and I hope it's gonna work. I mean, I'm sure the link works. It's just I hope YouTube is not going to cancel it, or just will allow me to enter the link. Okay, so let's try that right now. Okay, so the link is there. If you click on the link, you should get, no page will open, but you should be getting a file. A file should be downloaded on your computer, on your cell phone, on the device where you're watching this. And so when you download it and open it, it's like a document. You'll see a table with a few columns in colors and a few rows and some notes below. Chuck, can you say, and by the way, let me know in the chat box if it's working, all right? And Chuck, you go ahead and tell us what it's all about.
Yeah, so I'm not going to really, there's so much detail in this, I'm not going to go into great detail. I just want to, let's step up at the 10,000 foot view, or sometimes we call it step up to the balcony and look and say, what was I trying to do here? I was trying to use this to show clients my approach. And so sometimes I compress some of it and only show the top part. But basically you can see it's a sequence. We got to prepare. We got to, we got to frame the problem. We got to design a solution. We got to deploy a solution. So, and I tried to highlight the core, the primary tool used in each phase, and then other tools that help. I tried, because we're often in a leadership program, I tried to highlight the leadership kind of competencies that you want to promote during this phase. So it really is a way to help me train my teams, to give them the big picture of the knowledge we all need to sort of absorb. And some of us may not be doing it all, but just parts of it. But it's really a roadmap for the process I go through. And so what's the big picture process? It's basically, as I said, 80% of success is preparing for the problem. It's framing the problem. It's designing solutions. It's helping to deploy. And you need specific tools, none of which are rocket science. I mean, I teach them all the time. But you just have to be familiar that here's some frameworks that I can leave you with. And this is what I do to sort of say, if I can't be with you beyond, say, a certain point on that chart, let's talk about the tools you need and let me send. And I usually give people a knowledge bank with some of the key tools from each of those columns so that they can sort of learn on their own. I try to empower. That's my big point, is I don't want to live in that company forever. That's not my business. I don't want to sit in a chair and live in the company. And most of us as consultants kind of have that, sort of feeling. I want to be able, and I want to be proud that when I leave, I've left them with some tools, with some principles and mindsets to help them be successful.
Very interesting. So I'm assuming that these columns in color, they are like main stages of introducing change, solving problems. And then those rows are certain things that you should be mindful of, or you should include in each stage, like methods, mindset, leadership roles, values, core skills, agility stages, and so on. And those things in bold, I'm assuming, are the most important factors in each stage. So, for example, in discover stage, action learning is something that you focus on. Then in design and develop, action learning is still there, but you may focus more on design thinking, and then on change leadership, and then leadership system, and so on. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. So just to build on your point, so we never really leave action learning, because it really, I think of action learning as a meta framework, an overarching framework with the principles of action learning, of asking powerful questions, of reflecting, of making sure you have diversity of opinion. And we know that time and time again, it's been proven to me that the people that often ask the most powerful questions are not even experts in the area. I remember working with Microsoft and a problem owner who was the general manager in China, and she was convinced that she needed to expand the strategic thinking skills of her group. And she couldn't get off the idea that there's some kind of course out there. There's some kind of magic course, and I just need you guys to tell me let's create the magic course to do that. And what the people began to realize was, as she talked, she realized there was a lot of differences in philosophy between China and Microsoft headquarters in Washington. And she just couldn't get why that was important. Finally, somebody drew a picture, and here's a best practice. Somebody drew a picture of two airplanes, one at, say, 10,000 meters and one at 20,000 meters. One was going east to west, one was going north to south. And the picture helped her see that even if I get the planes to the same altitude of strategic thinking, they're still going to be going in different directions. And she had a huge aha. So again, that was such a powerful learning for me, because I was thinking, how are we ever going to shift this woman? And so if you're not using visuals in your work, and we know we have graphic illustrators now. I mean, this is becoming common. But even simple drawings, like two airplanes, you don't have to be an artist. You know that. It can help you get an insight. As a skit can. A skit can help you embrace the emotional content of how happy or unhappy a customer was before and after your idea. They feel the emotion. They see it, and they go, "I want this," even though they don't have all the details in hand. They want that feeling. If you can get me that feeling of that happy customer, I'm behind you. I'll give you money. I'll give you my support.
Yeah, it's very inspiring, and I take it. I already have some thoughts in my mind how I can include this in my work and encourage people to I will use visuals even more right now in my work, and I know how it can impact my work with them and their understanding of what's going on. So I have a piece of information for everybody who is out there watching this webinar, because we have a few minutes before we finish. If you want to learn action learning, there's a chance to learn action learning. And I know I even can see some people in the chat box who are already action learning coaches in Poland. But for those of you who are not yet action learning coaches in Poland, there's a chance to learn. We have our School of Action Learning, and probably somewhere below or above this video, you'll see a link to more information about the School of Action Learning, and the soonest edition is in December, and it's face-to-face in Łódź in central Poland. And then we have some online classes also in English, by the way, in January. So there are multiple options of learning action learning and getting certified with WILE, which is the World Institute for Action Learning that Chuck is also affiliated with. If you're not sure whether you want to sign up or not, or whether action learning is for you or not, let me know. You can email me back using that email that I sent you before the webinar, or you can schedule a conversation with me. Also, above or below this video, there's a link to like a form through which you can schedule a talk with me in Polish. Well, but if you prefer in English, we can talk in English, about the School of Action Learning and the certification process and how everything looks like. I can help you decide, not really sell it to you, but maybe just I will ask you some questions to help you decide whether it's for you or not and whether it will meet your needs or not. Chuck, one final question. If you were to say, imagine somebody's already a design thinking facilitator, or an experienced consultant, a trainer who's already working in the business, a coach. What do you know the calc program, the action learning training program? Mm-hmm. Why would someone come to a program like that? What do you think they could take out of this?
I think what they'll take out of this is a way to sort of increase the impact of what they're doing by an order of magnitude. And it's through that simple, if you got to get the problem right before you move on to solution. And 80% of the time we're not doing that. So that's the, if I had to say there's one big takeaway, it's the ability to frame a problem, and it's the also then to get better and better and better. And teams don't do that by reflecting on the actions we've taken.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
It's a discipline.
Thanks so much, Chuck.
You bet.
It's been amazing to have you here on the webinar. Thanks for all the materials you sent out of all your own initiative. Thanks for being so willing to share your experience and your skills and your knowledge. And I can see somebody's, calling you. You probably have a lot of stuff to do. And it's early morning, your time. So, the whole day is waiting for you. So I'm not taking too much of your time anymore. Thank you so much for being here. And good luck with all your projects. I'm keeping fingers crossed for everything.
And thanks for doing this, Tom. I can tell you all that Tom is one of the bright lights in the World Institute for Action Learning. So he's got it together. And I love working with him. Thank you, Tom.
Chuck. I appreciate that. To all of you watching this webinar, thank you so much for being with us. Again, I keep my fingers crossed for your work. Let's do good work. And I will keep in touch with you. I'll probably email you some information about our upcoming webinars. Please keep in touch. Please let me know what you think about these webinars. I'm happy to receive emails, read your emails, reply to them, to your messages, and just stay in touch. Have a great afternoon, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.